So now we're going to segue to another impressive speaker for the afternoon. Our keynote speaker for the afternoon is Dr. Mark McClellan. Dr. McClellan is the Robert J. Margolis Professor of Business, Medicine, and Policy and Director of the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy at Duke University. So he also bleeds Duke blue, I guess, since, Bill's over there. My daughter's a Duke alum, Roseanne, so there's a few of us.
I'm rapidly getting indoctrinated.
Yeah, so Dr. McClellan is a doctor and an economist, and his work has addressed a wide range of strategies and policy reforms to inform healthcare, including payment reforms to promote better outcomes and lower cost methods for development and use of real-world evidence and approaches for more effective drug and device innovation. Dr. McClellan is a former administrator for the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services and former commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He was also a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and professor of economics and medicine at Stanford University. And Dr. McClellan is going to speak on the National Evaluation System for Health Technology. I was part of the planning board, and Mark and his team led this effort, and it was a great collaboration. And I think look forward to hearing his insights in terms of the emerging opportunities going forward. Mark?
Thank you. Bill, thanks very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today and to see so many familiar faces, but especially to see so many people coming together on critical, practical, challenging issues like the last session represented. I think some of the other discussions that you're going to hear about, already heard about today and later today. I just want to start with just a note of congratulations to Bill and the whole MDIC team. This organization has not been around that long, but already, as you can see, it's having, I think, a disproportionate impact on some very practical but important issues that companies, regulators, different stakeholder groups just can't handle, just can't address effectively on their own. And as Bill said, that happens because you all are fitting this into or on top of your day-to-day job. Hopefully the connection will remain as clear as it's been with the work that MDIC is doing so far. And I think it's actually going to get enhanced. What I want to talk about today is this new National Evaluation System for Health Technologies. You heard about the overall vision, I think, from Jeff Shuren earlier today, and Rob. This is a key part of his vision for more effective use of real-world evidence to protect and promote the public health, but also to improve our healthcare system and health in other ways that go well beyond FDA's direct activities. As Bill said, we've had a chance to work on this, the process for developing a plan for implementing this national evaluation system with a number of you in this room. Some of the MDIC board member participants have participated actively in this. Bill has been a great contributor to the effort. And what I'm going to talk about today is actually going to be implemented through the coordination and leadership of MDIC, and reflecting the importance of this group. So it's been a great collaboration with us at Duke Margolis. More to come. Just a little bit of background on the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy. This is a new program that was started this year with a founding gift matched by Duke from Dr. Bob Margolis, who's a big believer in getting policy right, having policy led by people with clinical knowledge and expertise, but also working closely with patients and other stakeholders to improve healthcare and health. We are a university-wide program at Duke. I report to the provost. We have faculty affiliated in the business school, the public policy school, throughout the medical center, and very much with Rob's old stomping grounds at the Duke Clinical Research Institute. And we also have a big presence here in Washington for those of you who worked with us in our Brookings Center for Health Policy before. It's so efforts like this that we really are aiming to support. And again, that's why I'm so pleased that the NEST program has gotten to the stage where we are today. This is actually a very timely presentation. The planning board for the National Evaluation System for Health Technologies just released its report this week for laying out how this process can go forward. And again, the FDA recently recently announced its intent to implement this program using MDIC as the home for the coordinating center to help launch this effort on a large scale. As I'll talk about in a minute, this is a key part of FDA's strategy for developing better evidence on the safety and effectiveness of medical products, but also I think will soon become a linchpin in the national efforts to move to a much more effective learning healthcare system that really fulfills the promise of real-world evidence. So I'm going to try in the next half hour or so to cover three main things. One is the context for NEST, and thanks to what you've heard about this morning and earlier this afternoon, I don't think I need to spend a lot of time here. As you all at MDIC know better than anyone, there is a tremendous potential for medical devices today, but especially those in development and those in refinement, to have a big impact on health. So we need a national support system that encourages that innovation, but also makes sure that it's the treatments, the devices are safe and effective. That's why FDA is so interested in these issues related to real-world evidence. Medical devices keep changing, and a lot of the opportunities to learn about them don't really come until they're in clinical practice. On the other hand, as I'll talk about, there are some ways in which our current regulatory systems have far less than the ideal information they like to have for supporting patients and healthcare providers in making decisions about medical technologies around safety and effectiveness evidence. But also, it's not just about, as you all keep talking about, it's not just about FDA approval, it's also about effective use. That includes coverage, it includes making sure we're really learning with devices that are on the market about how they can add the most value to the lives of patients and how they can help avoid unnecessary healthcare costs and how they can be used as efficiently as possible. And real-world evidence is really critical for that too. And so the impact of NEST, properly implemented, I think will go well beyond the core issues around safety and effectiveness of concern to the FDA. So NEST is going to be central to that. What I'll talk about is describing how we see some of that happening, and then spend most of the time on this last topic, the recommendations of the NEST Planning Board for how to get from where we are today, where there is all this potential and all this multiple stakeholder interest and all this technical opportunity to fulfilling that reality. So I'll talk in some detail about how the planning board for the NEST did its work and what its recommendations are, and hopefully again have some time for a discussion after that. Again, this is all founded on real-world evidence as being very valuable for all stakeholders, certainly for industry in terms of better evidence and maybe faster ways to support high-value innovation, for regulators in addressing gaps in safety data and having richer information on the risks and benefits of treatments for particular types of patients, for healthcare payers to inform coverage decisions, and implement payment reforms, as many of them are focusing on today, that are really intended to create an environment that encourages high-value uses, not just of medical technologies, but of all of healthcare and providers, along with patients who are kind of at the center of all the decisions here. Having better evidence available, having better ways for patients to control their data and use it to help get answers to the questions that matter most to them. All of these are central opportunities for progress on real-world evidence. But as and you heard all that from Rob, and I know many of you are very familiar with these issues, the reality is frankly not there yet. There's some big challenges in getting from here to there. In the work that the planning board did, we very much were cognizant of the context in which we are, and the challenges that we face in actually developing and using real-world evidence. For one thing, while there is a lot of healthcare data, real-world data is definitely not the same thing as real-world evidence, and to turn it from data into evidence takes a lot of difficult steps. Most healthcare data is not necessarily standardized, very complex information, and may not be sort of reliably collectible from different data sources that need to come together. Making that process more routine and automatic is happening slowly over time, but boy, it'd be nice if it happened more quickly and effectively, particularly for clinical data integrated with utilization, financial data, the sort of the whole picture that you need to have a longitudinal picture of a patient, patient-generated data as well, to understand the risks and benefits and value of medical treatments. With better data, it should be possible to incorporate this data more effectively to support clinical studies, but as you all know, there's some big challenges in the design and implementation of clinical trials, a number of administrative burdens and other factors that contribute to higher costs, and once again, a better real-world evidence support system could help address those challenges. As Rob hopefully mentioned this morning, since I don't think he's given a talk on real-world evidence where he didn't, real-world evidence needs to incorporate God's gift to humanity, which is randomization. Did that come up this morning? That's yeah. Well, I have to say I'll take his one of his favorite lines. That even with having lots of data, it can still be hard to tell whether it's the treatment, the practices, or whether just something about the patients that you didn't measure well that's contributing to the outcome. So randomization is very valuable for many regulatory questions and questions about effectiveness, but also potentially safety. So finding ways to incorporate randomization into the real-world clinical setting is happening now with some pragmatic clinical trials, NIH collaboratory work that PCORI is doing through PCORNet and so forth. And this is all starting to happen, but it's far from routine or easy. And then in many cases, randomization won't be feasible. Have to rely on observational data. There are some questions that are just not long-term questions, other things that are not easy to address, impact of formularies, impact of maybe provider or operator skill that are hard to address using at least traditional randomized studies. So better methods for addressing potential biases and for getting a level of broad-based confidence that non-randomized studies can be used in things like product changes in product labels or support for reimbursement. Again, these things are happening now, but a lot of room for improvement. We have in this country an emerging set of real-world evidence networks that are all dealing in one way or another with these issues, and they're all in one way or another dealing with the same underlying potential sources of data for learning about what really works and how medical treatments can be used more effectively. This is a slide adapted from one that people like Rich Platt and Rob Califf and Janet Woodcock and others who are all leaders in this effort use regularly, highlighting that in this country we actually do have a number of real-world evidence networks functioning already. The NIH Collaboratory is doing multi-center clinical trial, randomized clinical trials that get into real-world practices, real-world clinical practices. Sentinel has been around for quite some time now, hard to believe, but almost a decade, and now does routine drug safety surveillance, working closely with FDA on both strengthening signals and more recently even for addressing some questions about effectiveness of vaccines and other products regulated by CDER and CBER. Now has routinely uses data on close to 200 million Americans for some of these studies using a distributed network. And PCORNet is now up and running and operational with a lot of support from my colleagues at Duke for integrating claims and clinical data from some of the same kinds of sources that are used in these other networks for other purposes. And one can imagine that we're on track to have a number of these networks that can draw on the same underlying data and work more closely with patients and providers and others in the healthcare system to get the evidence that we need. But we're still early on in this process overall, and certainly some opportunities for better supporting these efforts. And that's the context in which our planning board started to address the questions about how best to implement a medical device evidence system to add to these national learning health system capabilities. The members of our planning board came from a wide range of backgrounds, including people who I'll talk more about in a minute, who have had experience in industry, experience in academics, experience as patient leaders, and other perspectives as well. We highlighted a number of particular issues from the start that we thought were going to be important in building an effective network. I think this came up in some of the earlier panels today. It's one thing to come up with a way that technically could address an important public policy challenge. It's quite another thing to come up with a way that is practically implementable and sustainable. So in our thinking about implementing this national system, we focused on a number of issues that we thought were going to end up being critical. And if you look at some of these other systems that are underway and starting to play a bigger role in real-world evidence development, these same features are there as well. Critical to success is broad-based support and public confidence for not only the mission, for why we're trying to put data together and use it for evidence, but also how it's being executed. And I'll come back to that. Broad-based support. This is not something that one stakeholder group can do alone. It's something that should be broadly supported, and like the Sentinel program, for example, should be able to earn broad bipartisan support for Congress. And that leads to the second point, which is having some core financial support. Although these are, in many cases, distributed systems that have a lot of work done by the contributing organizations, having some core support for issues like governance and establishment of standard practices, continuous learning about best practices and so forth is very critical for maintaining and improving the capabilities of these systems. Also important is leverage. As I've just described, there are, and hopefully in the future will be, a growing number of networks or efforts to pull data together from real-world uses and learn something from it. I think we need to embrace that. This is not the path to success is not imagining there's going to be just one network to accomplish everything, but rather that there are potential multiple types of applications which can be supported by focused networks in a way that actually helps all of them accomplish their activities more effectively. Data models that have been developed in Sentinel are being used in the PCORnet network, and some of the efforts that PCORnet has put together, adding to Sentinel capabilities, for example. Another key issue is distributed capabilities and reliance. I think we're headed for maybe growing reliance on virtual network. When FDA set up the Sentinel program, one thing they did not want to do was try to get all the data related to patient safety safety of drugs in the U.S. population into one data warehouse that would be held at FDA or anywhere else. Rather, the approach that was taken there, and one that I think is a good model for PCORnet and some of these other networks, is a shared commitment from different organizations that can contribute data partners in these efforts. They can work together not by necessarily sharing all their data, because there are proprietary concerns, patient confidentiality concerns, and the like, but using common data models and common shared statistical methods. And statistical parlance, it's really, in many ways, that these efforts are about sufficient statistics, not individual details on individual patients that make it up. So distributed analytic capabilities, and then starting in a realistic way. So not trying to boil the ocean at once, but finding, and this requires some of the most careful thought. It's like, okay, these are all well, there's a lot of potential here, but what do we do first? What's something that is, what's a potential application, a pilot, a demonstration project that is feasible in the near term, that may not represent sort of the full capabilities of this network, and in some ways may even look a little bit modest, but is a valuable thing to know and can be accomplished as a start to building out the capabilities of the networks and systems. So we came into this with that kind of background, and the planning board, as I mentioned, was made up of a number of leaders with concerns about medical devices, including people like Bill Murray, but also academic leaders, Harlan Krumholtz and others, healthcare providers, people who are involved in doing medical device studies and evidence development now, people like Dr. Michael Mack from Baylor, patient advocates, other experts who all had a shared interest in these goals. When we started our work back in 2014, our focus was on just first articulating what the vision for a national system like this would be, and then some broad-based strategies for implementation. And our first report, released in February of 2015, was entitled Strengthening Patient Care, Building an Effective National Medical Device Surveillance System. That's before we got the really clever NEST acronym applied, but same goal. Around this time, FDA was undertaking some other efforts to further the establishment of this national evidence system. Mitch Krukoff, who's here today, was one of the leaders, has been one of the leaders in MD EpiNet, a system of collaboration of the device registries, and he was part of the leadership of a registry task force that released a report in August of last year describing how the existing sources of real-world evidence could come together and build out some additional capabilities for supporting a national system. The idea was to recognize that we have some resources and capabilities in place now, but that with a thoughtful strategy, we could move away from traditional registries to using the registry model to better pull together information from where it already exists. Think about maybe moving in the direction of virtual registries or a network of registries that could answer a broader range of questions at a lower cost. At the same time, FDA, under Jeff Shuren's leadership, was moving in the direction of making real-world evidence a clearer central strategic priority. And I'm not going to go over this in any detail because you heard directly from Jeff about the centrality of real-world evidence systems in CDRH's priorities as a key part of the overall strategy of protecting and promoting the health of the public when it comes to medical devices through better, more efficient development of evidence and more confidence in the effective use of medical devices. So that too was part of our process moving forward. And in our next phase, building on all of this, we use the FDA strategic priorities and the Registry Task Force report as the backbone for going into a more specific framing for how this national system could be implemented. That was our phase 2 work last year, and just in the process of concluding right now with our report this week. As part of this effort, we were asked to define the objectives and capabilities for what we were envisioning as a coordinating center. So, not, again, just one monolithic entity overseeing all of this process, but a way of coordinating all of the potential efforts and participants in contributing to a better national system for evidence on medical devices. So a big focus of our report has been, of our recent work, has been on defining the objectives and capabilities of the Coordinating Center with a broad-based input from the Planning Board and many other contributors to our reports. So we published a report in April entitled Better Evidence on Medical Devices, a Coordinating Center for a 21st century national medical device evaluation system. And the efforts to keep this process moving along as we were finishing our final work, which I'll talk about in a minute, the FDA has gone forward with establishing that coordinating center process now. In our subsequent work, we focused on the strategic priorities and the demonstration projects that could be used to build out the NEST shared resources that we described in that April report. And these are the recommendations that we released in yesterday's report, which was entitled NEST. We have the acronym right now. NEST, Priorities for Effective Early Implementation. Again, fitting with that overall strategic goal of making sure that we have something to show for this effort soon for the public as it goes forward. So that's an overview of the history here. So we started out thinking collaboratively about the mission for this national evaluation system. That led to the broad functions that it would entail. Those were covered in our early reports. The initial capabilities and implementation timeline, centering on implementation through a coordinating center, and then building out system governance and some strategic priorities, which we just announced this past week. And just to share a few of the key content elements of these reports, this is the mission statement for NEST that the Planning Board has suggested. It's, as you can see, very aligned with MDIC's goals and something that all of our stakeholder participants very much believe in, that a real-world evidence system like this can support optimal patient care by leveraging the experience of patients. And by the way, patient centricity was a key element through all of this, leveraging the experience of patients to inform decisions about medical device safety, effectiveness, and quality to promote the public health. The functions for carrying out this mission, key functions include supporting the timely and reliable development of evidence on benefits and risks of a medical device throughout its life cycle. Another key theme here is the life cycle of medical devices, with lots of opportunities to learn and lots of opportunities as a result to increase public health benefits after products are on the market, and as a result seeing a real balance between pre and post-market data collection that hasn't existed so much in the past, but it's definitely where policy and technical capabilities seem to be headed. Second key function is collaboration with external organizations to support other high-priority evidence development needs, product tracking and utilization, quality improvement, analyses that have economic components, like the work with healthcare payers, who I think have a lot of value to see in this system. And this gets back to that key point about leveraging activities that are also underway and that could also benefit from this new device evaluation national network. So vision for NEST, what we like this to look like, what the Planning Board like this to look like in a few years. A strategically driven, coordinated network of voluntary partnerships that is working efficiently to help generate better data, for real-world data from our healthcare system, and to use it to turn into evidence at a lower cost, evidence that can improve and inform patient care. This vision includes a number of key partners, data partners, and I'll talk in a little bit more detail about who some of those might be, but you saw that on that earlier slide, with NEST becoming another key linchpin national evidence development system, along with some of the other existing ones. Methods partners, as you were just talking about in the previous session, methods for interpreting data, especially interpreting data that comes from complex sources and may not be randomized or are not straightforward, and having a collaboration that can build on the best ideas out there and hopefully reach some consensus about how to move forward with them as a critical part of NEST. And patient communities. This is increasingly important in healthcare delivery, not just because of the increasing attention to concerns about patients and patient centricity, but that's where a lot of the data are going to come from in the future for an efficiently designed system. And I'll come back to some pilots related to that topic. And that NEST will be a multi-stakeholder public-private partnership under the guidance of the Coordinating Center. That Coordinating Center would have a clear and transparent system governance. This will help with those trust issues and maintaining broad-based support. It'll have a practical focus of maybe starting with a limited number of pilot or demonstration opportunities and then building them out. It will have the capacity to evaluate how the system is doing and evolve as it learns lessons about what works and what doesn't in evaluating the needs of stakeholders. And this is a chart taken from our report. I'm not sure how easy it is to read on the screen, but the Coordinating Center is going to bring together a lot of different pieces to make this work. Input from patient communities, input from the FDA, participation of private health plans, which are an important source of longitudinal data on outcomes and utilization of services by patients. We'll collaborate with other existing sources of evidence, including real-world evidence like Sentinel and MD-EpiNet and PCORNet and others. We'll collaborate with manufacturers as an important source of data and an important audience for the results that are coming out of this, with kind of a shared interest among manufacturers in learning more and more quickly about how their products work and how best to improve them. And as you can see, a lot of other partners as well. Methods partners to help develop the data. And again, this is not about replacing a lot of the existing infrastructure that exists to improve real-world data development and real-world evidence development, but about building on them together. So as you can see, this reflects some of those key principles that we started out with. Think of NEST as a gateway for making it easier to answer relevant and important real-world evidence questions by providing a faster way to more effective resources in real-world evidence. This needs to be a patient-focused system, a patient-centered system that is starting and ending with questions of high interest to patients and the clinicians who are involved in their care as well. It needs to be innovative by incorporating real-world data to improve our understanding of the quality of products and reduce the costs of generating this evidence. Reusability, scalability, this fits in with the notion of this is a network that can leverage and support other efforts to develop real-world evidence by collaborating with existing networks, existing organizations that are key parts in developing evidence on medical devices. Trustworthiness. This is an approach that right now has very broad support in the healthcare community through a broad range of stakeholder groups. And to continue that, continued engagement of patients, all the other stakeholder groups through representative governance, transparent communication will be very important. And along with that, clear expectations and policies. We walk through in the report some important practical considerations that have come up here, like protecting manufacturer intellectual property, by the same time allowing access to this evaluation system for other analysts and having a transparent and routine approach for reporting and sharing the results that come out of it. This is all going to be successful only if this kind of broad stakeholder engagement is continued and strengthened. You can see on this list of some of the stakeholders that we specifically call out. There's some that, again, go beyond kind of the mission of the FDA alone. CMS involvement was part of our planning board and a very important part of our planning, as you heard on the last session, thinking about all of these audiences together if we're going to develop a system. And I've already talked some about these other stakeholders. In terms of building out the shared resources here, like some of the other networks that are becoming a more prominent part of medical evidence development generally, we envision NEST as being a network of data partners that can participate voluntarily. And what NEST really does is bring down the cost of bringing in participants, but still maintain their belief, their momentum, and their support for participating in these efforts. It's still voluntary, but things like standardized methods, standardized data use agreements can make it easier to do these kinds of large-scale studies. Having an emphasis on developing the best possible methods, tools, and best practices for conducting these studies. Another critical technical part of NEST, supported by the Coordinating Center, but one that can further drive down the cost and increase the benefits of participating in this network. And then finally, this should be the place that is a reliable, up-to-date, and trusted source of information and evidence on the risks and benefits of medical devices. So a dissemination component for the national evaluation system as well, for effective communication with the public, with patients especially, but healthcare providers, other networks. Timely information sharing with industry is also very important. We did spend some time on the practicalities of implementing this, and without going into too much detail up here, this is a summary timeline. There are a number of specific steps that the Planning Board thinks would be very helpful in getting the Coordinating Center and this NEST system off the ground as soon as possible. That starts with key operational details like having an executive director and governing board in place, and then getting some functional multi-stakeholder committees working under the Coordinating Center's overall strategic guidance to work on some of the key initial priorities for pilots and implementation activities at NEST. We have some ideas in our report on what these initial demonstration projects can be. I'll talk about those in a minute. Some that we think could be implemented in the pretty short term, within a year, and others that may take a little bit longer to get off the ground, but that can really add to the strength and support for NEST and the relevance of NEST in the near term. And per the FDA's guidance, the idea is to make this an independent coordinating center, an independently led process within 5 years. Within these early activities, we focus on a couple of things. There's some more detail in the report on overall governance for this effort, starting with a governance board, executive director, and ability to carry out day-to-day activities through a staff. This would be done in conjunction, as I mentioned earlier, with external advisory committees focusing on some of the major tasks of the center. This report was not meant to be prescriptive. I think the MDIC in particular has a very good track record of being able to bring in different perspectives, and so it's a great entity to implement this. But the Planning Board did think it was important to be clear about a effectively sized governance board with some experts in content, leaders who are trusted by the key stakeholder groups who need to be actively bought into this effort, and a recognition that this is going to take some real time commitment to get off the ground effectively. We had some other specific recommendations around how the selection process might work, how federal representatives could fit in, and how to get some turnover and fresh perspectives as well, and some of the things that the governing board might do, overseeing basically how this national network gets off the ground through its bylaws, through its operational processes, and the like. The other thing is a key part of our report this week was how to get started, where some of the best opportunities might lie. And again, this is all going to be worked out by the coordinating center and NEST as it goes forward towards implementation, but with the idea of getting some early wins, some early impact. We think there's a lot to build on in kind of the existing capabilities that the NEST can bring together. We talked about in our 2015 report a approach to the data infrastructure that NEST can develop over time. This would include UDI adoption and linkage across multiple registries. The registry report that I alluded to earlier describes how that can be done in more detail as well. Also important is developing, or in some cases just adopting, a common data model to get the core shared data needed for these projects together and off the ground. And also an early emphasis on including patient-generated data, since that was a key priority for many of the members of the planning board. We envisioned that this could get going that our job was to conduct an environmental scan, which we did over the early course of this year, to identify ways in which this infrastructure could be developed in the near term with some practical applications by building on existing activities and setting some goals to track progress in terms of pilot implementation over the next couple of years. And that led to these 5 demonstration project areas. These are meant to be high priority projects that meet the needs of multiple stakeholders, but that also are feasible to get going soon, particularly what we called our phase 1 projects, and that's the first 2 on this list. This includes this idea of efficient and effective balancing of pre- and post-market device evidence development. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, since it's one of the early pilots. And also looking at ways to increase the quality of information that can be pulled from adverse event reporting. Currently a significant source of data, but also a significant burden for companies without good denominators for the safety data as well. We also highlighted 3 other areas for where we think it's going to take a little bit longer for the pilots to get off the ground, but definitely could be done, could be started within the next couple of years. And that includes better data collection related to the safety of Class 2 devices, which do not have, in many cases, much systematic safety evidence now. Better methods for incorporating patient-mediated data sharing. So this is, the NEST should actually be a driver towards putting more control with patients of their own data. And then ways to connect the NEST infrastructure with key issues in promoting better use and higher value use of medical technologies, such as in post-market evidence development related to value that payers might use, and support for the development of results-based contracts and move to alternative payment models. I just want to spend another minute or 2 on the 2 short-term projects, balancing the pre- and post-market evidence development and the better safety data reporting. One of these focus areas is on conducting post-approval studies more effectively and having an infrastructure in place that could support more complete conduct of the post-approval studies, drawing from a broader range of patients, is a nice way of building on the registries that exist today, the systems that exist today, but scaling them up to a truly national and more virtually oriented system. we listed in the report some foundations for building this out, including some of the existing registries where there are some opportunities. They're performing very useful functions right now, but there are opportunities through using the kind of real-world evidence resources that we've described here for them to either reduce the cost of data collection or improve the breadth of patients from whom they're collecting data, or improve the quality of the data that are going into these registries. It's the next generation version of registries as we move towards a more national virtual system for tracking patients with particular kinds of health problems through multiple systems. The other pilot that I'd like to highlight quickly is more active surveillance on safety issues, and the goal here is to increase the quality of medical device surveillance, safety surveillance, while reducing the burden. Many of you in this room are familiar with medical device reporting, or MDR, requirements from the FDA. We certainly see, from looking at the systems that are available today, a very big potential, maybe starting on a limited basis, just with some reporting and some devices and so forth, but a very big potential to make that more automated, to use electronic data systems, claims, electronic record systems, to do more automatic surveillance, which would have the advantage of both reducing the cost of data collection, providing much clearer denominators for the patient population from which these safety events are being reported. And once again, there are some pilot examples, or what we could view as pilot examples of this taking place now. Delta, Astra D, they're not nationwide, they're not covering everything, but they are a foundation for short-term progress on much better, towards a much better safety and more automated and lower cost safety surveillance system. I mentioned some longer term opportunities emerging, and when I say longer term, I mean 2 years, not 1 year. The report describes some ways to build more on patient-initiated data sharing and incorporate patient-generated health information, as well as bringing in data from clinical and provider systems, and helping to address questions of relevance to payers, to CMS, to patients on the effect, not just the effectiveness, but the value of medical technologies, cost impacts, and the like too. So that's in the report as well. And I just want to conclude by saying that we can get there from here. Between the foundations that we have to build on and the strong and broad support that we saw in the work going into this planning board report, coupled with MDIC's capacity to bring together stakeholders and practically implement right away this whole coordinating center approach, I think within a few years we can realize the vision of NEST. And I think within a few years we'll have a different view reflecting the FDA's strategic vision for how pre- and post-market regulation works, as well as much higher, deservedly higher expectations about the quality of evidence on medical devices, and much higher expectations about the efficiency and the timeliness of the biomedical innovation process involving medical devices. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to join you today to talk about all these important issues. Thank you. Yes, if there are a couple of questions, happy to talk about that. I should also say, if you want more information on our reports, they're online now, also at the FDA NEST-related website. And Heather, who's here today somewhere, is a good point of contact as well. Mitch.
So, Mark, great overview, and just a quick comment on the issue of timelines and deliverables, to recognize that there are so many pieces to this that are so novel that a lot of projects are probably in a position before they reach the final deliverable, so to speak, to report on just steps and stages along the way, lessons learned, how to partner, little things that may seem little, but in a system like what NEST really aims to be, the ability to do this in one area, like orthopedics, may be profoundly influential in other areas, like cardiac or OBGYN. So the little bits of reporting and smaller steps may also give the whole program where so much needs to be done, earlier timelines to at least make people aware of what's going on and potentially help other areas reuse lessons learned.
That's right. I couldn't agree more about the importance of building on what's there and thinking about this incrementally, finding specific areas, orthopedics, maybe others, where there are opportunities right now to build this out. We think is going to be most helpful for turning this into an effective and sustainable system that the public will really see some benefit from.
Thanks, Mark. Great presentation. Appreciate it. Very thorough. One thing about Nest, wondering is there a function out there, whether it's Nest or another entity, that could serve almost like a common provider that others can use? For example, if a new patient advocacy organization were to come together and try to gather patients to try to collect patient data, they're not going to be sophisticated enough, like ACC or somebody to set up a massive patient registry. Has there been any discussion about having some sort of almost shared capability that maybe even Nest could be a host for?
Yeah, I think that shared capability comes in a couple of ways. One is just solving these problems and not resolving them. So for take your example of a patient group wanting to do a large scale data analysis and not starting from scratch. Well, obviously, Nest will be working on some projects that are in that same general area of needing to pull together patient data. And Nest is going to build on work that's gone before. We don't envision Nest reinventing its own common data models or ways of pulling data from existing systems, because other efforts are doing that now. PecorNet, Sentinel, private sector efforts. This is not going to be the first virtual registry approach. I mean, these building blocks are out there now. I think what Nest can do is bring down the technical barriers to doing it generally, and potentially provide either a direct mechanism for access if it's something that's kind of within the Nest kind of scope of mission and governance, or alternatively make it easier for the next. If none, as I mentioned, none of these networks we think should try to boil the ocean and cover all of the needs for evidence development and in the U.S. healthcare system. But by having these systems in place, they're models. They're sort of best practice coming together. If you want to do a study like this, don't start from scratch. Get some broad-based support. Get a core degree of funding that can do some critical functions for pulling together these efforts, and then build on the existing ones. So, whether it would be within Nest or facilitated by Nest is less clear. We don't want to slow down efforts to address more evidence related questions. We want to facilitate that. And remember, all the partners in Nest, this is a voluntary program. There's no legislation saying you have to contribute your data in this way. So making it easier for these new high value needs to come together, even if they're outside of the Nest scope directly, we think would be a big contribution of this effort alongside the other ones that are emerging.
Mark, just one real quick question.
Yeah.
In terms of
Bill.
how are you thinking about this in regards to outside the United States? I mean, in terms of the global sort of collection of data, is this intended, to be kind of U.S. centric, or is this going to be really? Do you have partners outside the U.S. who are going to be working with us to help to enable us to make sure that we're getting the full picture versus just a regional slice?
Yeah, certainly a lot of the partners in Nest are people or groups that have global concerns. Now, our focus in the report was on the U.S. system, so there's nothing in there about envisioning a global role of Nest. We were really U.S. focused, but the same principles that I talked about in terms of common data models, best practices for tracking safety and the like, we certainly hope can be generalized, and it's certainly part of our work at Duke Margolis and many others in this room is to take these best practices and make them global.
So it's so exciting to see how all the pieces are coming together. I'm a member of the MDIC Case for Quality, Product Quality Outcomes team, and what we're looking to do is develop if you will, consumer reports for medical devices. And we put together a dashboard and we run a pilot, and it was very successful. The challenge that we faced is getting that data
Yeah.
and
Getting
getting
the
that
data and then
registry
how to do
data
it again
that's-
the next time at a lower
Exactly. So
cost,
we have
yeah.
the front end. If you can
Yeah.
provide the back end,
Yeah.
we can really bring it together.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Great question to end on. Thank you all very much. Great working with you all.